Good morning. My name is Allayna Frank. I am a genetic counselor at SUNY Upstate Neurology in Syracuse. I'm here today to talk a little bit about how epilepsy genetic testing is conducted, kind of the what, why, and how for getting genetic testing for epilepsy. So a little bit first about this person that's telling you what to do and how to do it. I'm a genetic counselor, like I said, at SUNY Upstate, and I have been here since 2022, straight out of school. I am a CNY native, so I am originally from this bright green star way up north in New York, but before I returned to Syracuse, I did a little foyer into the University of Pennsylvania, where I trained at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in their Epilepsy Neurogenetics Initiative clinic while I was getting my master's degree in genetic counseling. And you might see here, I've got my alma mater, my undergrad in RIT, so I've been all over the state and happy to represent today. So what even is genetic testing? Before we get into how you would get it, let's think about what our genes are and what we're looking for on the genetic testing. Every single one of us in all of our thousands and thousands of cells in our bodies have 46 of these chromosomes. These chromosomes are packages for our genes. They're really tightly coiled, containing lots and lots of genes per chromosome. So we have well over 20,000 genes in each of our cells. And these are almost like the words in our instruction manuals. These genes are telling our bodies what to create and what to do with what it creates so that we can carry on in our lives. So when you look for genes, you're almost uncoiling this chromosome here and looking at each individual word in the instruction manual, which looks like little beads here. In real life, they're not nice round little packages like this. They're actually also coiled up strands of DNA. DNA is like all of the words combined in our instruction manual. It's the piece that we need to understand to read. And the reason that I compare genes to words is because if you zoom in even further on those genes, you'll see each of these individual bases, these letters down here at the bottom. Bases are represented by letters. These letters mean gibberish. They're not going to line up into nice words that we would understand in English. But in the genome, in all of our genes put together, these mean very important things. So if we look to the right side of the screen here, you can see that these spellings, T-A-T, C-A-T, C-C-T, are always three-letter words. And each of those words tells us how to make a certain protein. This is getting pretty granular. We don't need to know what each of these proteins under the arrows mean. But a good way to think about them is that they each have their own shape, like a puzzle piece. So as we follow these instructions for creating proteins, if we spell one of those words wrong, we have to think about what that means for the puzzle piece that should be created. So these next three categories show us different types of genetic variants. You might recognize a genetic mutation more closely. We prefer the word variant because not all of them mean that the shape of the puzzle piece is going to be changed. But for our purposes here, let's talk about what happens when we do have a variant that changes the shape of the puzzle piece. Sometimes we swap out one of these letters. So right here where we're supposed to have a C, instead the body created a G. It's hard to say why it created that G, and we can get into that more later. But even though CCT stands for this pro shape right here, CGT makes a completely different shape, this ARG shape. And that puzzle piece does not fit into the puzzle pieces around it the way that pro does nicely. If we were to add a letter, almost like you're typing and your finger accidentally hits an extra key, then that bumps the next C out of the way. So now where we used to have CCT, we have CGC in our three-letter word. We pushed that T into the next section of three-letter words, and now we get TAA, and we actually have a little extra letter right here. CGC also makes an instruction for this ARG protein. We can have different combinations of letters to make those proteins. And we know that that one doesn't fit over here with HIS. So that's going to be a problem for us. But even more, now that we've changed the last three-letter combination, this TAA actually tells us to stop making protein altogether. That is a stop codon. So if there were more three-letter combinations that came after this, we would lose all of them because we just told in the instructions to stop creating proteins. If we were to delete a letter, let's think about right here where we used to have CAT, we deleted the A. So now our combination of three is CTC. CTC makes this LU protein. It shifted all of the letters next to it. So now we have another LU protein and an ARG protein, and none of these fit very nicely together. So this is a combination of proteins that won't come together into a nice puzzle or a nice function or structure in our bodies like we need it to. So why is it important for us to know all of that complicated information that I have a whole master's degree just to understand? Well, have you ever asked why epilepsy is happening? Why do I have epilepsy? Sometimes the genetics can tell us why that's happening in the first place. In other cases, it can actually be helpful for knowing what to do about that epilepsy. Some specific genes, when they have variants in them, respond really nicely to a certain medication. Think about the fact that we know which puzzle piece isn't shaped the right way anymore. Let's help it do its job with this medication, or even replace that puzzle piece in some cases. When we know what the genetic cause of your epilepsy is, sometimes we can compare to other people that have had the same type of epilepsy, the same genetic cause of epilepsy. And we can say that, well, all of those people had epilepsy when they were kids that stopped when they were around 9 to 13 years old. That's just a really broad example. And we can't say that every person will fit into the box that we've created based on looking at other people. But it gives us a little bit of expectation, to a little bit of context to help guide our care going forward. In the same way, sometimes we can say most people with this genetic cause of epilepsy also have learning or developmental difficulties. More people with this type of epilepsy have unfortunately experienced SUDEP, that sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. So this tells us a little bit of what to watch out for based on the population of people that have had the same condition. If we know that there's a genetic cause of the epilepsy, we can also start tracking it through the family. Now, some of us end up with a genetic variant all by ourselves. We didn't inherit it from mom or dad, even though we get all of our genes from them. Think about a little elf at the time that a baby is made, typing all of those instructions from dad and from mom into this new baby. If they're typing really, really quickly, they might make a mistake. They might hit an extra key in there or hit the wrong key or miss a letter. And so sometimes this happens completely randomly and isn't something that also came from mom and dad. But if it is something that came from mom and dad, that means that any other children of that mom and dad could be at risk to have the same condition. For the epilepsies that start later on that aren't present right at birth, it might be helpful for us to test that baby and know that they could have seizures in the future, just so that we're watching them more closely. Or some people might choose to try to have a baby that doesn't have that genetic condition. And some of that is possible through in vitro fertilization and genetic testing before the pregnancy is even conceived. And then lastly, kind of my favorite part and the reason that we're all here today is if we know what group of medical conditions you fit into, you can find other people and make friends with them because they're experiencing the same thing. For us, we get this awesome group of people that all have epilepsy. When we find a genetic cause of that epilepsy, if it's a specific condition, we can connect with other people that have that same specific condition and understand people that have even more similar experiences to us, right? We all have very different types of epilepsy, different experiences with epilepsy. So sometimes it's nice to get together with a group that has a slightly more similar experience. It's like a subgroup. Now, not everyone that has ever had epilepsy has gotten genetic testing, not by a long shot. But we've tended to say as a genetics field that people who have seizures that start first thing in infancy, or that are really, really severe seizures, maybe really frequent, that are getting in the way of early development in babies, people that have seizures and learning or intellectual disabilities, people who have seizures and autism, all of these people are more likely to have a genetic cause of their epilepsy. But genetic epilepsies can present anytime, any age. They can look very different. They can be generalized or even focal. And there may or may not be other pieces there like autism or learning disabilities. And so at this point, recommendations are starting to be extended to every person that has epilepsy to get genetic testing. In fact, a new guideline paper was just published by an awesome, awesome group of genetic counselors last year who said, based on our experiences and the experiences of other people that we've spoken to, we're going to recommend that genetic testing for epilepsies looks like this. It's just a recommendation. It's not rules, but we as genetic counselors can use these recommendations to justify why and how we're approaching genetic testing. Sometimes we need to justify to insurance companies why we're ordering the test that we're ordering. So having a group of guidelines like this says, this is what everyone else is doing, and gives us a little more confidence that that's what's necessary. This paper started with 2 recommendations after all that they studied. The first is that everyone with epilepsy that hasn't already found the cause of their epilepsy should be offered genetic testing, no matter what age they are. And this is a little bit different from the way that genetic testing used to be considered. It used to only be offered to those people that fell into those groups I mentioned before, especially young people. And still, we have a little bit of trouble justifying to insurance companies that an adult with epilepsy should get some genetic testing, but this guideline helps. It says, without limitation of age. The second recommendation says we strongly recommend that genetic tests are selected, ordered, interpreted, done by a qualified healthcare provider in the setting of appropriate pre-test and post-test counseling. Appropriate provider doesn't have to be a genetic counselor. More and more, that's what it is. But doctors are able to order genetic tests and other healthcare professionals that are able to order anything at all for you. The setting of appropriate pre-test and post-test counseling is a really important piece of this recommendation as well. This says that we think that there should be appointments or at least time set aside to talk to the people that are getting their genetic testing to help them understand what's this test for, to go through some of the things that I'm talking about today, maybe in less detail, maybe in more detail, based on what the patient would like to know about themselves, about the test, about what comes next. So doing that pre-test gives us the opportunity to say, what is this? And doing that post-test gives us the opportunity to make sure that all of the results of the test are well explained and well understood, so you don't get lost in the meantime. Now, in this paper, they also compared the benefits of different types of genetic tests. In my clinic, am primarily using these two highlighted options here, the multi-gene panel and the whole exome sequencing. And this is tending to be the trend for the genetic counseling field. We're straying away from microarray a little bit, and we don't really have access on a clinical basis to whole genome sequencing in all places. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about what these two tests are later on. How do we get this genetic testing? If I've piqued your interest so far with explaining all of what genes are and what genetic testing can do for us, here's what we start to think about for making this happen for ourselves. First, we need to know that epilepsy is there. You can't just say, I think I might have epilepsy, and look for a genetic test. We want a doctor's opinion in there too, that says, yes, we think that this is probably epilepsy. No, we don't think that it's anything that can look like epilepsy. Some people may be familiar with this, but sometimes when you have a condition that makes you pass out, like a heart condition, or when you have movements that are not necessarily controlled, like tics almost, sometimes those can look a little bit like seizures. So we need a doctor in here to make sure that we're testing for the right thing in the first place. And that doctor is the one that's going to make a referral to a genetic counselor. There are a few genetic counselors throughout New York State. You have your option to request referrals to certain genetic counselors. You may need to request from your doctor, well, I know that there's a genetic counselor in this area. Can you send me to that person? Then there's that pre-test counseling appointment that I talked about, where we talk about any questions the genetic counselor or the person doing the genetic counseling has after reading the doctor's notes. So we get the doctor's notes and see why they think you have epilepsy, but sometimes we still want to know a little bit more about your family history or how we came to that diagnosis. That's when we talk about what the options for testing are. We go through that list of 4 tests, and sometimes we'll reduce it down to those 2 preferred tests, and then talk about how we get the sample for the test. Usually that can be a cheek swab, or maybe saliva sample, or a blood draw. Continuing on through this process, we have the insurance authorization time. Sometimes that's happening at the same time as testing is being ordered, and you're seeing the genetic counselor kind of in the background. Sometimes that can be ordered by the lab that's doing the genetic testing too. So sometimes it's not your counselor that's processing the insurance side, sometimes it is. Then we're waiting for a test result to come back. And this takes longer than a lot of blood work does. We're looking at minimum 2 weeks for your results to come back. Maximum, I say up to 6 weeks. Sometimes I see it go as long as 8, and that's if we don't get held up with insurance in the meantime. So genetic testing can take quite a long time. After the test, generally the recommendation is to have another appointment to talk about the results. Sometimes you'll get a phone call or a letter with your results, especially if they're pretty easy to understand and you covered all of the details pretty well in your pre-test appointment of what to expect. But sometimes you'll have an appointment to talk about what those results were and to discuss if we need to move on to more testing if we didn't get an answer on that first one. Then the genetic counselor or the person doing the genetic counseling should pass that information along to your neurologist or the person that's diagnosing your epilepsy to say, here's what I found, here's what I understand for this person's care going forward, and what I would recommend based on these genetic test results. A genetic counselor isn't a person that's going to give you a new epilepsy medication based on the results, but they can tell your doctor, I would recommend that you try this medication if you need to change any meds. So if we condense that timeline down into one slide here, just into headings, I want to pull out a couple of these lines to focus on a little bit more deeply. In that pre-test counseling appointment, there's a lot for us to discuss there. I'm going to teach a bit in my pre-test appointments personally about genetics and about epilepsy, similar to what I've done here, although maybe not in so much detail. We're talking about why we're doing genetic testing, and I'm explaining why you're at this appointment in the first place. And then we're discussing, why would you want genetic testing? How do you feel about it? Because genetic testing is always optional. Remember, at this point, you've already been to a doctor and gotten a diagnosis or a suspected diagnosis of epilepsy. And lots of people have their epilepsy managed without knowing what the genetic cause of it is, if any. So we can absolutely do that for you. If you don't feel like genetic testing is going to benefit you that much, or if it's information that you don't want, then we can skip right over this. But you can have that appointment first to find out about it, to hear me out, right? I want to know what's going into your decision to be tested. Which of those possible benefits do you want? Do you want to plan for future pregnancies or for other kids in your family that don't have epilepsy yet? What would you prefer to know? Is this epilepsy something that came from my side of the family, because everyone I know has had seizures? So how could this help you? And remember that this information can have long-term significance. So if we find a genetic diagnosis for your baby, they're going to have to learn about that information in the future, and they might want to think about it when they're having kids. So you're choosing for your baby right now to get some information that they may or may not want in the future. So let's think about whether you would want to give that level of information to your kiddo. And then also, are we considering any specific genetic conditions? When you come to me, I am keeping an ear out for certain notable words in your history. Does it sound like you have a specific type of epilepsy? Because generally there are certain genes that go along with that. Take, for example, seizures with fever, febrile seizures. So some people will not make it to genetics because when they only have febrile seizures, because the assumption is all of those seizures are caused by the fevers. But there actually are some genes that will make you more likely to have a fever, or I'm sorry, more likely to have a seizure when you have a fever. So I'm going to make sure that we're paying special attention to those genes based on our conversation ahead of time and knowing that you only have febrile seizures. I still think we should test, but I'm going to make sure that we're watching a certain subset of genes. Do I think maybe that there's another condition going on here? Should we be throwing on a test for something other than the epilepsy? Now, this is a slippery slope. I really only know how to talk about genetic testing for neurological conditions, but maybe I'll make a recommendation to a different type of genetic counselor, someone who works in cancers or in heart conditions, or I'll include that information when I send off your testing. We'll see if we find any genes, and then I'll send you to someone else to give more information about those genes if I don't feel like I can explain them well enough. All right, back to our outline. What goes into that insurance authorization piece? This is a piece that remains a mystery for many clinicians, many patients, and it's constantly changing. But what the genetic counselors tend to train themselves in is the billing practices of the labs that they use for their testing. So take me, for example, I've included a screenshot from the GeneDx website. That's just one genetic testing place that you can order from. I just picked a couple of random ones here. There are lots and lots of options for us and lots of things going into considering which to use. The GeneDx website uses this patient billing page to explain what a patient should expect. So they say your healthcare provider places the order, and GeneDx, the lab, places the prior auth request from the insurance company. So they tell the insurance company, we're about to do this test. You should, start considering whether you're going to pay it. They continue doing the testing at the same time. So they aren't delaying your test results coming to you based on the insurance company taking a while to decide whether they're going to cover this. Sometimes that means that we finished a test and now someone has to pay for it. and the insurance company has said no. So that's something to be prepping yourself on ahead of time for the genetic testing. Sometimes we can do what's called a benefit investigation. So we can say ahead of time, I'm going to order a test for this person. This is the one I'm thinking of. If their insurance company says yes, that we can have it, how much are we expecting that it's going to cost for them after insurance kicks in? That's just one lab's practices. Another likes to tell us that with insurance, usually you're paying less than $100 for your testing. So that gives us a little bit of a threshold to prepare for in case the insurance does deny. We can say, well, we expect that it will probably be under $100 anyway. And they list out here how billing through a private insurance versus a Medicare versus a Medicaid. There are also very often patient assistance programs. So that's based on your household size and how much income you have. They may reduce the price of the testing even after insurance kicks in. And so this is lab by lab, and sometimes you'll have to work with your genetic counselor to decide which lab to order the test from. This lab, Invitae, and the other lab that I mentioned, GeneDx, both have an epilepsy panel. If they both contain similar genes, let's talk about which one will fit your billing availability better. There's a lot to go into that conversation. It's very personalized. And back to our outline again. Let's talk about what the actual testing involves. I mentioned that in the pre-test appointment, we're going to talk about those different genetic test options for you, including which lab to order from, how many genes they have on their panel. My standard is around 300 genes on an epilepsy panel. So there are about 300 genes that we know currently can cause epilepsy. Some labs may feel that only 200 of them are certain. So we're only going to show you those. And some labs may feel we want to include the genes that might cause epilepsy, but we don't know yet. And they might offer 400 genes. Now, these are the panels. This is a selection of just the words from your instructions that, if they're spelled wrong, could cause you to have epilepsy. A whole exome sequence, that other one that I tend to favor, is 20,000 genes, all of your genes. And we're pulling out just the genes that have variants in them, and then filtering that list even more to tell you about the ones that could fit your symptoms, so that could fit epilepsy. And that's because lots of us have genetic variants that don't ever cause us any issues. They don't cause us to ever need medical attention because they're benign variants. On a whole exome sequence, you could end up with lots of benign variants or ones that we're not sure if they're benign yet. So we need to tell you about reducing that down based on your symptoms. So these two tests are almost like spell checking your genes. We're looking to make sure all of the letters are in the places that they're supposed to be. Other genetic tests, like a chromosomal microarray, I didn't highlight this one in our previous list, but that looks for whether you have sections of your DNA missing or duplicated. That would be like accidentally typing one line in your instruction manual twice, or skipping right over a line as you're typing it out. And those instructions don't really make sense anymore. And there's not really anything wrong with the words there. They're just not there, or they're there twice. The whole exome sequence in some labs will cover missing and extra sections of chromosome as well, where the panels are really just spell checking for us. They're just looking at the individual genes. And then, of course, it's the genetic counselor's job to understand, how reliable is this lab? What do they like to report? Do they tend to call things positive when we're mostly certain, or only when we're very certain? How are their billing practices, like we discussed? And how big are their panels? And then in that post-test counseling appointment, what are we talking about there? Well, what did we find on the genetic test results? And there are a lot of different things that we can find there. This is not just, yes, we saw something, or no, we didn't. And that would be a positive versus a negative result. And we do get those sometimes too. Positive result is when we see pathogenic a positive variant that we know interferes with the gene's ability to do its job. And we know that when the gene can't do its job, the person will have epilepsy. The negative means that out of all of the genes that we looked at, we didn't see any variants that could explain your symptoms. For a whole exome, that means maybe we saw variants, but none of them cause epilepsy or the type of epilepsy that you have. Sometimes we'll fall in between those two results. We'll have an uncertain result. A variant of uncertain significance means that we see that the spelling of the word has changed, but we don't know what the shape of the new puzzle piece is. Maybe it looks the same and still fits into the other puzzle pieces. And so we look for other people that have similar, or that have the same, variant of uncertain significance and say, do they have epilepsy? Do they have similar symptoms to my patient? If so, then maybe this common thread between everyone is what's causing their epilepsy. Then over to the right here, these two options can come up on any test as well. They don't really mean anything for us in terms of current clinical care. That means it's not answering the question as to why we have epilepsy or what we do about it. An incidental result means we might have to start some medical care for a condition that we weren't even testing for in the first place. So heart conditions are a good example of those sneaky ones that we weren't testing for this, but sometimes we see that gene that we're looking at for epilepsy isn't changed in a way that causes epilepsy, but is changed in a way that affects your heart rhythm. The charges in our brain, those fiery electricities that we measure on EEG, those are the same charges that happen in our hearts to make them pump. And so heart conditions are really the one that we're prepared for a possible unexpected result there. And then carrier results. This means that we have one positive or pathogenic variant in a recessive gene, which means that the other copy of the gene is still working just fine and we're not going to have any symptoms. Recessive conditions only happen when we knock out both copies of the gene in a cell. Remember, we have 2 copies of every chromosome and 2 copies of all of the genes that are on them in every cell. So a recessive result, a carrier result, doesn't mean that you have a condition right now, but it means that if you have children in the future, they could inherit that recessive variant from you and also could inherit it from their other parent and end up with the condition, have both copies of that gene knocked out. So it's more of a future preparation consideration. Any of these results could warrant some further testing, especially though the negative and the uncertain. If we don't find an answer for why you have epilepsy on a panel where we've selected just some genes, maybe we should look at all 20,000 of your genes and keep digging. And then finally, this clinical correlation piece. What are we telling the doctors about your genetic test result? And what are we doing next? A positive result might give your epilepsy a name. We might say that you have, for example, tuberous sclerosis. That is a condition that can cause epilepsy. And maybe that condition has some other follow-up recommended. Maybe that can affect other organs too, and we should have those checked out. Or maybe it just tells us why you have epilepsy. An uncertain result may require some more testing, like I mentioned. Maybe we have to test mom and dad of the person that have an uncertain result to collect more information about whether this is coming from a person in the family that also has epilepsy. Or maybe we need some non-genetic tests to figure out if this is a reasonable result for the patient. Maybe if we look over to the right here, we have to tell the doctor that this person has a gene that goes with a disorder that's treated well by a certain medication. So these KCNQ2s are potassium channels. So if we turn up the potassium activity in those channels, we might be able to get control of the epilepsy. sodium and potassium have to play together. So if we need to turn everything down, maybe we can turn down your sodium and the potassium will lower itself down together. That's one example, and there aren't a lot of genes that can cause very clear medication recommendations to be made like this, but they're worth taking into consideration when we do find those. The neurologist is ultimately the person that decides whether you should have any medication changes or whether you should go to another provider for other checkups. You should still follow up with the neurologist per their recommendations. The genetic counselor isn't now going to take over epilepsy care. They're going to tell the neurologist what they would recommend, and the neurologist does with that what they think is appropriate based on their medical training. And that is the broad strokes of genetic testing. I'm going to open up for questions now. I'm happy to take any questions about everything that I've covered here or things that you wish I had covered. Before I do, though, I want to thank the Epilepsy Coalition of New York State for having me on today. It's been a real pleasure to work with this group and to be able to talk with all of you.